Welcome, everyone, to Reclamation, a beEmboldened initiative. I'm Naomi. I'm the founder and executive director here at BE, and we exist for the healing from and prevention of spiritual abuse. And we're doing a survivor story today. I have not had the privilege of recording a survivor story in a while. And if anyone's been following along, you may know I haven't released an episode in general in a while. And I do have a few that are ready to come out now. Maybe some will have dropped before this conversation with us, Blake, but I haven't done this in a bit. And there's some reasons for that. One, and I'm curious if you have thoughts on this, actually, if you would want to jump in here, Blake, but it can take a while for someone to decide if this is something they ever even want to do, and to feel like they have a solid enough understanding of what their story is. It's safe for them to share all of those things. And so it's a big decision to decide to publicly come out and share someone's story. And so I actually would love to start there if you're open to it. What has that been like for you?
Yeah, totally. I definitely get that, because when you and I first started meeting, I found beEmboldened. I was in a really difficult spot emotionally. Lots of crippling depression and anxiety and grief, like a lot of complex stuff that I wasn't aware of each thing that was going on. I was just completely overwhelmed. So the amount of pain I was in, I could definitely see this being an impossibility, doing something like this. And in that time period, maybe a year or two, that was kind of like that, really intense year, and then a lot of ups and downs. I was really helped. It really ministered to me having you have survivor stories on your podcast and finding things like that to listen to. There was something, I don't know if healing is too strong a word, but deeply helpful about the kind of solidarity there, just the understanding that you're not alone, you're not crazy, and other people have been through something very similar, and there are other people that understand exactly where you're at. There's something just really helpful about knowing that, even if you don't know the people, right? Even if you don't get to speak with them yourself, which is better. So yeah, once I was out of the depths of that kind of darkness, I kind of jump in all in, like I'm very fast to seek out information, to talk, to process. So once I was kind of over that hump, I mean, I've been happy to do this for a year or so now, where it was such a help to me to hear other stories. Yeah, so I'm happy to be here to maybe be that for someone else, hopefully.
Well, and something that I think you were kind of just alluding to is, for all of you who tune in or listening or watching this, Blake has shared in bits, which is why I think it's going to be really great for people to be able to listen to this conversation. He has shared in bits as a guest survivor in our Can I digital course and our Rebuilding with Biblical Literacy digital course. So depending on when someone's listening to this, those will already be out, or they'll just be launching. They're coming out in 2025. We've got one actually, it'll be announced June 2nd. And so this will probably come out during that time frame. And I think it's a really neat opportunity for people who maybe have gone through one of the digital courses or are thinking about it, and they hear, these different snippets of stories like yours, and maybe want to know, like, hey, who's this person I'm connecting with? Like, because no one shares their whole story from start to finish in the way that we're going to do today. Of course, not everything, but just get these little pieces of someone's experience. And so I think this is going to be a really nice opportunity for people to connect more with you and with other guest survivors who are in some of these programs that we're creating, hear more of what their experiences have been. And I think, like you shared, Blake, the connection that you have felt through these kinds of conversations, that solidarity, maybe different words that capture what we've experienced that we just haven't quite had the words to describe well. That in and of itself is healing. That language is so healing. So
that's
Blake
definitely true.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I didn't think of that, but that was something that was also very helpful, was like when I first discovered your story, before I heard any other interviews on your YouTube channel, it gave me language and description for exactly how intense I was feeling. It was so messed up. I had no description for it. Like, I didn't understand it cognizantly well enough And that helped me a great deal just in communicating with family, like in explaining it helped me understand it and be able to explain it to others. So yeah, that's very helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So with that, let's go ahead and jump in. I'll start with, well, how would you describe the group you were involved with? What words do you have for that?
Well, it's weird because a lot of things jump to mind with that question. So there's good memories with it, so there's loss there. There's a level of structure and certainty about the world and the way I saw things and what I was taught to believe that honestly feels preferable sometimes to the level of uncertainty that comes after leaving. And so there was an element of good in the way I was brought up, that certain things I'm thankful for. That being said, it was two-phased. So I was raised from birth, I guess. I can always remember in the Worldwide Church of God, or once it kind of fell apart, offshoots that were very, very similar. A lot of small groups that were very similar. So I was raised in the Worldwide Church of God, and then spent all of my childhood and teenage years in an offshoot that was not virtually identical, but very, very similar. And then at 18, I joined a different group than the one I was raised in, that was also a splinter group of the Worldwide Church of God. And it became a much more intense thing for me personally. And then this was still in my developmental years, right? Like 18 to 25 and beyond. It was run by someone with narcissistic personality disorder. That was the leader. And so the level of abuse and spiritual abuse and emotional abuse and the control that I experienced there was quite a bit high. Like, I just kind of caught stuff as a child, I think, from the general environment and the types of things that were handed down to me by my parents. Like, there's certain culture and belief system, but I wouldn't have called it abusive, if that makes sense. Although I definitely would call the Worldwide Church of God a cult. So yeah, I would describe it, if you wanted me to condense it down, as controlling, very, very fear-based, apocalyptic doomsday, very legalistic, fundamentalist, and literalist in some harmful ways, and ultimately just very, very painful and damaging in the long run. Is how I would sum it up.
When you're talking about how you were raised, so birth through 18-ish, when you said you made the transition, so that would be the Worldwide Church of God. Are you drawing a distinction between what would have been maybe quote unquote abusive, or if you'd use a different word still, for like the cult at large versus your own home dynamic?
Yeah, I would definitely draw a distinction there. Like, my parents, I think, are the most wonderful people I'll ever know. I think I may or may not completely agree with all of the doctrinal beliefs that they may or may not still hold to. Like, they've evolved and changed a lot over time. But that aside, I would still describe them as the most loving, like, best representations of what a Christian should look like. So yeah, I would not label them in any way, shape, or form as abusive. The difficulties I grapple with today as a result of my childhood are, like, if you're going to differentiate the church group and then my household, stem a lot more from, honestly, their belief system at the time in that group, coupled with their own difficult childhoods and past and the way it shaped in, and then the things that I kind of catch by proximity as a result. And none of those things are abusive. They're just things that lead to lots of anxiety and stress, honestly, as a personality type. But yeah, the most harmful things that I caught by proxy were a direct result of just the overall mindset of the group, the church that they were in for a really long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think sometimes people share in the opposite. And so I wanted to highlight that because some people will share that their church was actually the healthier space, and it was the dynamic in the home that was so problematic. And so we can have one or the other. It's not always both, and it can be in any direction. So when we're talking about spiritual abuse and other forms of abuse, again, it looks different. It can look different from household to household and church to church, of course, and not always in churches either. I mean, parachurch organizations, the mission field. I mean, this can look very. I mean, it can pop up anywhere.
And to clarify that point a little bit further, like what led me to seeking out beEmboldened, I probably never, ever would have or felt like I was in the place to need to do so had I stayed at home at 18 and remained in that environment. I would be in a very different situation now. So there were things that were harmful to my psyche and my overall view of the world from that church background, right? But I was far enough removed for it and raised by great parents. And then the pastor of the offshoot splinter group that I knew mostly from the ages of like 10 to 18 or so, was really genuine, loving. Like he was the opposite of like a narcissistic leader, like might have been common in the Worldwide Church of God or that I experienced later. So, but the level of psychological trauma that led me to kind of completely spinning out of control, having to exit an actual cult and end up just so distraught and in so much pain. I didn't know which way was up. It felt like my life could be over. Seeking out your help. That came from a more intensified group that I joined at 18 with similar background, but yeah, kind of three distinct categories there, honestly.
Yeah, it sounds like it, because you've got the Worldwide Church of God, which is not one and the same with your household. And then because of your household came through Worldwide Church of God, less scathed than many have, and then transitioned at 18 to where it really, really got abusive. It got bad. So would you start there? Would you mind sharing more about, I think, starting with just how that transition came to be? How did you get connected with this other group you became involved with at 18?
Sure. So the Worldwide Church of God was big on keeping the seventh-day Sabbath on Saturday, and with that, all of the traditional biblical holy days, abstaining from any normal cultural holiday like Christmas and Easter. But we kept Passover and the Days of Unleavened Bread and the Feast of Tabernacles. So the Feast of Tabernacles in particular, you travel away most of the time to an external feast site that's usually hosted by a group in the same organization, but a different group. And it's kind of like a big festival party type of thing. I mean, except that there's church every day, dry church with hymns and dry sermons, and not fun for a kid, right?
Do you mean dry as in no alcohol, or like dry as in boring, or both?
Dry as in boring. Dry as in boring.
Okay, because I was like, do you typically have...
The Feast of Tabernacles specifically, the Bible says, enjoy strong drink, actually.
It does. That's what I was wondering.
That's actually preached about. It's like, you're at the feast. Go out and spend your money on alcohol. You know, it's not to get drunk, but to enjoy yourself. I mean, I didn't ever see that happening. Like, I'm telling you, when I say dry, I mean boring.
Okay.
Because the Worldwide Church of God, by the time it's falling apart, there's all these splinter groups, and I'm out, there are no real young people in it anymore. Everyone that you're around, from a kid's perspective, I mean, we're talking, 70 to 80 is kind of the average age range for the congregants. So we traveled most of the time in the fall for the Feast of Tabernacles. And this particular year, we met through some other acquaintance, the group that was going to be hosting. And we traveled there, and we spent the feast with them. And it was a very, very different experience from anything I'd ever had growing up before the feast, because the leader there, he took the core beliefs of the Worldwide Church of God and then went out on a limb in a lot of different ways, essentially becoming much more charismatic. He was a musician and always loved lively music. He used to play rock, organ, and this sort of thing. And so they had a live band and did contemporary worship music. And there were a lot more people my age. And so immediately I was hooked. Now, the story at the time for me, what I truly believed was that I experienced the manifest presence of God there that had never been a thing before in my life. We had always had a very dry, transactional type relationship with obedience, legalism, and your Heavenly Father that's, watching everything you do and you better obey perfectly. But Protestant stuff, charismatic stuff was completely off the table. But not so at this group that was keeping all the core truth that, we would say the truth, which meant keeping the 10 Commandments and the holy days, essentially. Like Sabbath, the holy days. These are things that differentiate us from the world or the regular American church, okay? So the story for me at the time was I experienced for the first time in my life manifest presence of God and could see a realness to a relationship with God, with Jesus, that could be deep and fiery and exciting. And that drew me. I was baptized at that feast. I was 16 at that time. And it was the first time I'd ever felt like I could really, aside from operating out of fear and doing what you're told to do, it was the first time I ever felt like I could be drawn to God, to Christianity. And it was exciting. Looking back now, I cannot make heads or tails of what could be real and could be fake when it comes to an experiential type of spirituality where you're seeking the manifest presence of God and the gifts of the Spirit, and you're feeling things in worship music. I can't parse that out now, like what's real and what's not. But what I do know through a lot of therapy and self-reflection and working on getting healthy mentally is that I was a lonely, depressed teenager stuck in a group that because it was absolutely unlawful to seek friends outside of the faith, the one group that we're in, or a spouse, right? And so as a teenager with absolutely no social life, it was very life-giving to me to experience a group that was still in the truth that had people my age, honestly, to be friends with, or potential spouse material. We don't believe in dating, but it widened the pool for that a lot. And a layer beyond that is it really did feel like a breath of fresh air, the excitement of being able to experience live worship and seek the presence of God. And this experiential type of Christianity was very different from all of the dry legalism that I was used to, although it still contained those tenets. I forgot the question now.
So it was still, would you still consider it the Worldwide Church of God splinter group? Like, would you still call it?
I mean,
that?
it was in the majority of the core doctrines. It just was led by a leader that honestly was narcissistic and very opinionated and decided to mix in a different set of doctrines that the founder, or Billy Armstrong of Worldwide Church of God, would not have approved of. So it still held the core structure and was very similar in a lot of ways, but he wanted to branch out essentially in just the charismatic ways and adding in seeking the gifts of the Spirit and dreams and visions and feeling the presence of God and worship. That was the primary difference. But yeah, we always discussed, like it was in sermons regularly, the foundation that we had in the Worldwide Church of God, and the things that were right there that were true, but the things that they were all wrong about that we were going to do differently and more appropriately.
Okay. And when you're talking about the gifts of the Spirit, I know we both know there's room on where people land with that, on what, how the Spirit interacts today with people. And so when you're sharing that this edition is where things kind of went awry, what about this is what made it? Because that in and of itself, I think some would listen and be like, oh, well, that's great. That's as it should be. What about it was problematic?
Well, to be honest, I still have not reached a place in this healing journey, which it really is I feel like it's a lifelong journey, honestly. I think you can attest to the dips and the valleys and the peaks that come with that. And it depends on when you catch me, exactly how I'm feeling on any given week or month or year. So if I were giving you a very cut and dry how I see it biblically, again, like in my heart, there's still a lot of confusion and challenge and getting to a place of being safe and comfortable with all of this, knowing exactly how I see the rest of my life going spiritually. But if I were going to give you my answer at the time would be similar to the way I would see it now, is if you're basing it strictly on what the Bible teaches in the New Testament, then it wasn't problematic to a large degree. Like I might step on some toes here, especially with a lot of the NAR popularity now, but
you can step on NAR's toes. That's okay.
Well, or your traditional Pentecostal holiness or whatever. It was not a traditional Pentecostal environment where you could have everyone speaking tongues at all times. Like we taught, and you can find this scripture in the Bible that was out of control. Like the Apostle Paul specifically tells the Corinthians, this should be in order. You should be able to rein things in and have control. It should be 2, not more than 3 in a service at a time, having a prophecy, or if someone's going to speak in tongues out loud, they should know that there's going to be an interpretation, right? So there's an order to these things. So we were taught things like that specifically, right? There was, the only problem, if you're talking about what became problematic with that type of doctrine that was in this group that I moved to, was there are also scriptures that were not taught to me then that teach caution with pursuing experiential things. Like you're really putting a lot of weight on direct words from the Lord, visions and dreams and this type of thing. I'm not even going to tell you if I believe that at this moment in this day and age, if those things do or don't come from God still the way you can see in the Bible. I guess I believe that they do. But I've seen so much damage and harm and wrong done in the name of those things now that it's very difficult for me to trust much validity at all if someone's claiming that sort of thing. You know how it is with an abusive leader in a cult. If they claim to be God's number one prophet, and anytime they tell you God said something, that's wielded with absolute authority. And there is no questioning it. And a great deal of harm is done that way. So that would be the level of incorrectness. That would be the level of things going off the rails with that. But just the charismatic element as a whole, I personally think was still fairly appropriate on the baseline level of it anyway.
When someone creates this elitism around themselves, there's no spirit testing happening. There's no checking to see if it's a false prophecy. There's no holding it up to scripture. It creates this untouchable person. And sometimes untouchable can be used in like, oh, don't touch them because they're so lowly, which is terrible. and the way I'm using it now, I'd be like, well, they're untouchable because they're just so godly and they're so spirit filled. And so it really shuts down the congregation. The congregation cannot know the Lord the way this leader knows the Lord. And please feel free to push back if I'm not understanding correctly what you're saying, but I think that's what you're speaking to is this one person. He's the one hearing from God. And so that's that. Open, closed.
What's so interesting with that is you're absolutely right. But with him, I can't quite wrap my head around this because it's not, well, I don't know exactly what's typical, but it seems a little atypical, the level of confidence he had in his control. Like the level of narcissism there, I think was immense, because what you just said is accurate and true. But at the same time, he did encourage the entire congregation to seek words from the Lord the way he was getting visions, the way he was getting to pursue this type of relationship where we're all prophets and prophetesses and receiving vision. Like he wanted that environment. But he also was still the absolute and an absolute control, and you're terrified of him, right? So there was like this push and pull with that doesn't quite make sense to me. Like if you look back to certain types of groups, I mean, there was a time in history where the congregation couldn't read the scriptures for themselves, right? Like, so the level of control there with what's being handed down, but that wasn't us. Like we were encouraged to be seeking and studying these things out. But looking back now, I'm aware of we were under such an intense level of control and indoctrination that when we read the scriptures for ourselves, like we were well versed, like we read our Bibles, but when we read them, everything we read, your mind it's like you're already brainwashed. Your mind just automatically applies the information to the doctrine, that the framework that already exists, right? And then additionally, we didn't shy away from the scriptures that said to test the spirits, like we're seeking these spiritual things, but test the spirits and pay attention to the fruits. And it blows my mind now. Like we didn't shy away from the scriptures that talk about what a good pastor or leader or elder or whatever, the character that they should embody, that was preached by the leader. And somehow we were, it's hard for me to explain, but we were still able to hear that and to look past the glaring contradiction in his behavior and character with what he was preaching. I don't understand. Like you said this about your dad, right? There's the man, and then there's the prophet, like there's God's servant. That was there to a pretty great degree, I think. We're like, well, obviously we all have a sinful nature, but he got away with a lot under the category of, well, don't question him, and obviously he's a man with flesh and he has shortcomings, but those don't really get addressed in any way, and they might be a lot more than shortcomings if they're bordering on serious abuse. So,
right. There's I think there's two moves here for someone. And I mean, it's got to be coupled with other things like being an abusive person, having mental health concerns, sometimes very legitimately so, whatever it may be, but kind of two tactical moves, whether done fully intentionally or not. One is just avoidance of all the things that would contradict. And the other is to just jump headfirst into them. Because when someone is really bold with, yeah, check me, like check what I'm saying. But there's this check what I'm saying, but you'll see that I'm right. Because we should be saying, check what I'm saying. But there's that other piece to it of, and you're going to know that I'm right. You're going to see that. And there's that confidence. And there's that sometimes, that more charismatic. And I don't mean that in a Pentecostal way, just that personality trait or that length of time in the relationship. It could be
that
so
was definitely
relational.
There was a lot of charisma. There was a lot of ability to just talk and talk and talk and explain anything. Like, I'm not going to mention any names here. My sister-in-law described him as a person who could argue with you and convince you that the sky is green. There was a serious level of attractive charisma and just that personality that you really can't argue with them. And there was an incredible amount of confidence. That's a really good point. It's like, check me, and you'll absolutely know that I'm right. And if you try to tell me that I'm wrong, I'll convince you that I'm right, which just didn't really happen ever, you know?
So what happened? You meet this other splinter group at 16, actually. You end up moving at 18. What then happens from there?
Yeah, so I was pretty hooked at 16. I think my parents knew it. I spent a lot of time visiting between 16 and 18, going back for tent revival, gospel tent crusade meetings, and another feast, another couple of feasts. So are you asking what happened between 16 and 18, or what happened between 18 and now?
18 and now.
Well, that's the meat of the story, huh? Essentially, nothing incredibly notable happened between, well, I'll say I moved at 18, which was a very difficult decision because, like I described, I was very happy. Aside from the fact I was depressed, I was very happy with my family, like with my parents, and I did not want to. I was never the kid that was rebellious and dying to get away from the church I was raised in, or I truly believed it was the truth, right? The only way to heaven, the only group to be in. And then I was very happy with my family environment. Honestly, in retrospect, I think due to some of the effect of the group that I grew up in and the impact that kind of has on your household as a whole and the mindset and then your social world, the way it constricts all that, I actually think there was a good bit of enmeshment going on with me at home, which technically is a negative thing, but at the time I felt purely positive, right? I'm not dissing anything there. So it was very difficult for me to leave and to move. And the only reason I did was not because I was saying that, hey, there are young people and friends there, or it's more exciting than it is dry. I firmly believed then that God was calling me to his more special place with a better truth and a closer relationship with him, and to serve him like evangelically, and to be in a hotter, fierier. What's the scripture that they use? Jesus says, or David said, maybe it's a psalm, something about zeal for my Father's house. Jesus quotes a psalm. So this level of zeal for God and this fiery passion, right? This, I firmly believe that God was calling me to leave home. And that was very, very painful and a little bit traumatic. I don't think it's the wrong word to use. So, but I kind of gritted my teeth and did so without any counseling, to my regret now, without any real discussion with my parents, who I actually trust and love. And they gave me a lot of independence and room to grow and change and seek God for myself. I think ultimately they were happy for that, but it was difficult. And I left without any discussion with them, really, because I knew if I opened it up for discussion and counsel, I wouldn't have the strength to be able to break away, to do that. Like, I was that attached at home, and I wouldn't have been able to leave. So I thought it was the right thing to do. I thought God was calling me, and I just bit the bullet and jumped. And that kind of threw me into a whole new world. It's interesting, the hindsight you get having to process all of the trauma from 18 to 30-ish, I guess. So I moved into an apartment with a friend that was 20 years my senior, but my only friend for quite a few years in the group that we were in. He had been in the same environment I was, and then moved 6 months before me to join the second group. And I moved in with him, and there was a whole level of, I'm not really sure, that's kind of a whole conversation in of itself. There was a lot of stuff that happened, things that I experienced, moving out away from home, like on my own for the first time, and then kind of under his mentorship is how it was looked at. A lot of stuff went wrong there, and it left me with a lot of pain to this day. A lot of stuff that seemed positive at the time has produced an incredible amount of heartache in the long run. That's kind of a separate chapter to my story, honestly, but it's connected to the bigger picture of I'm thrust into this environment now, and I'm 100% bought in already immediately. So I don't actually question how challenging or wrong some of the things seemed, like all of the red flags. Because I guess to some degree I was naive. Like there's always a level of that, I think. I think to this day, it's becoming more and more tainted and cynical, but to this day, I have an instinct to want to assume the best for people, give the benefit of the doubt. So, but I was 100% bought in, probably a little naive, though I would say naturally, I think this is important to say, and I don't mean this in any sort of arrogant way, but I think I have a pretty decent head and intellect on my shoulders. And I say that because a lot of people make the assumption, like when you watch a Netflix documentary, that to people to join a cult, it's like, who would join a cult? Like, that's stupid, right? And it's hard for me to reconcile that for you, for anyone listening that doesn't understand from a personal experience. But what I'm trying to describe is I don't understand how I was able to just really overlook all of the red flags that existed immediately with this leader, with the way that he treated his family, with the overall culture of the group that was, like I said at the very beginning, there were positive social elements that still feel like losses and people that I love and miss today. But that being said, the dynamic of the group, the culture as a whole, was 100% cultish and toxic. So, I mean, I'm talking like a lot of gossip and backbiting and control and shunning, and like your behavior is highly scrutinized, and everyone is doing this to and ultimately you're all under this leader who's kind of this absolute authority and control that everyone's going to maybe report to, or it's messy. There's a lot of stuff there. And like when I'm going through this, like entering this environment, I'm also still kind of reeling from I don't know what you would call it exactly, but it was, homesick would be way too light a word for how I felt leaving home and ending up here out on my own in a group that like I loved. But what's weird is when they're welcoming you in, when like you first meet them, everyone that ever visited said, you feel God's love personally expressed through this group, all of these people. And we had that type of outward expression. But then once I was in, like I moved, I made the commitment. This is going to sound like kind of the wrong connotation, but I didn't feel as special to the group as you feel when you're first introduced. Like I didn't feel quite as welcome and part of the family like I did, to the extent that there was a lot of, I don't know if enmeshment is the proper word anymore in this environment, but there was a lot of deeply interconnected social world, like you're always expected to be there. Like every event, every gathering, like you're not committed if you don't show up. Like it is your entire social network of these 30 to 40 people, small group here. There is nothing outside of this for you. Work, any passion and pursuit that you might have, anything that would distract you from 150% commitment to God and his work and the ministry and these people that are God's only chosen people is wrong. So everything is just kept on, like, you don't make friends outside of the group. You don't go do anything that might be enjoyable to you if it conflicts with being here for an event at the group, to being completely committed. So yeah, it's tainted now looking back. It's hard to describe from this far out in the future the what felt like the right thing and a good thing at the time. Now I see it laced with so much bad and so much unhealthy interactions and behavior and environment that, yeah, it's kind of hard to give a straight answer. I'm not even sure what I'm answering anymore. What was the question?
Well, and that's part of what does hurt so much. I remember our guest Liz actually spoke about this, I think, a bit, because I remember it like really struck me when she said it. She's one of the very first guest stories that we have on our channel. And she talked about how there was this built-in community where, yes, there was these are supposed to be your people. There was also well, but I have my people. And so there was something nice about that. And it's really hard actually coming out to not have that anymore. And community connection can feel dissatisfying on the other side of an experience like this, because there is such an intensity and because of the mix of expectation, but to a degree, at least sometimes a large degree of a welcomed expectation, because it means people are going to show up. I mean, I've joked before with friends, and so I'll extend this to all of you. I really wish that I could be Mormon, because the way they show up for everybody, I'm like, man, I have a couple friends. I know. And I have a couple friends who came out of Mormonism and they're like, oh, that was the real win. But we know too much. We're too informed and we couldn't do it. But gosh, like, you're sick, everybody shows up. You're moving, everybody shows up. And they stay until you're actually unpacked. Like, the photos are on the wall. It's just incredible. And so there are real goodnesses, I think, that they go soul deep. Like, these aren't just like superficial. I mean, just feeling supported in that way. And it is really tough after to say, oh, that was bad, because there was something so good about it. And there are people involved who are genuine, who are also people who were abused and who were genuinely showing up for one another. And there was a beauty in that.
To that point, looking back at my description of what the environment was like, it's a description of the culture and the framework that we existed within, but each individual person, now I kind of have to exclude the leader here, I think, but my friends, like my family, like this, what you're describing was 100% there. Like, each individual person I would call genuine, and with a lot of friends and people that I really loved. And we did have that dynamic where you show up for one another. And yeah, like, it's not a slight or an accusation on any individual person. Like, it's just the culture that we were all the negative part of it. But then like you're saying, there was so much that seemed very good there that feels like such a tremendous loss to use my people as to lose my people as the reference. Definitely.
How would you summarize what was wrong? What went wrong where you had to lose your people, where this had to come to an end? Why aren't you still a part of the group? What happened?
So I believe the group was always a cult, and there was this level of toxicity and unhealthy environment. Like all of the things that make up a cult were there, but it was below my radar enough to where I think it would have continued and existed. Like I would still be there, if not for what came around COVID. It's interesting how many people I meet and talk to that COVID completely changed their life or their world. That's just, it's really bizarre. Like the level of change that induced just across person after person after person that I've spoken with. So, and it did that for our group. So things just really, really began to escalate. This is a long story, but if I were going to start with a nutshell to sum it up briefly to kind of keep me on track here, we followed this leader 100%. He was God's prophet, and we're always excited about his next revelation. And looking back, like I could see the cycle of, he was kind of ruled by his emotions, and therefore we all were. And so, like every Saturday service, he walks into the building, everyone's kind of on bated breath. Like either he's going to come in and he's going to be smiley and happy and like, God loves us all today, and it's going to be a great worship service, and you're relieved and everything's great. Or he's going to come in pissed and in a bad mood, and the sermon will be about how disappointing we all are and how far short we are falling of pleasing the Lord, and we better get our butts in gear and turn it back up, right? And there was just this cycle all the time across time. Like that's just what always existed. And then he would go through these periods where he would try to work up, now looking back on it as the way I see it now, work up this frenzied spiritual environment when he felt we were being apathetic, or God felt we were being apathetic. And he would be dissatisfied with our lack of spiritual excitement, the normalcy that can creep in, or complacency, and want to work up some great spiritual revival. And that happened to crescendo, and like this cycle went on forever, and it happened to reach a real intensity. So how did the time frame go? So to zoom out and get kind of a bigger picture, he was doing this, working up to us needing the best spiritual event and revival that's ever existed. He likened it to the outpouring of the Spirit that Peter, I believe, references in Acts, and right after Pentecost, one of the first sermons, where he references Joel 2 and says that this is being fulfilled today in your midst. So our group leader said that he didn't really know. He was just talking about a foreshadowing of Joel 2 being revealed in your midst today. We're getting the real one, the real Joel 2 experience. Like the Apostle Peter, he had it half right, but he didn't know what was coming for us. I know you're struggling
bold.
not to laugh at how ridiculous that
it's
seems.
It's just bold. But when you're in it, I'm not laughing that it'd be ridiculous that you would sit there and listen to this, because I mean, you know a lot of the wackadoodle stuff I sat and listened to. So I'm smiling just because of the boldness. I mean, people get really bold, but when you're boiling a frog, right? That analogy of it. If you walked in and that was your very first sermon you listened to, you might be like, this guy is maybe coming on a little too confident, but it wasn't the first one.
No. And we had been boiled in the water for a long time. And so when this happens, it does get a little uncomfortable. Like I remember with the Joel 2 reference and calling the Apostle Peter as like, he kind of had a half right. In that same sermon, I believe, I also remember it being said, I know that what I'm saying is stretching things a little, and it seems a little wild, and like I'm taking some liberty here. But he said, but that's what the whole religious group of the time thought about Jesus and the Apostle Paul, with what they were saying. And I remember when that was said, the temperature on this boiling water was really being escalated very quickly. And this period of time lasted about a year or two, year and a half. So something like that. My time frame is a little fuzzy, but it was being turned up too quickly for a lot of us. And when he said that, I was like, yeah, but you're not Jesus or the Apostle Paul. Okay. You're not being canonized here in scripture. So he was pushing it too far, although we had been brainwashed enough to where we were still towing the line. We were sitting through this. And so to zoom out a little bit, before this new spiritual move that he's pushing for gets this intense, I believe he developed feelings and desire for a younger woman in the church. He started spending a lot of time alone with her. I'm not the only one that believes this. Pretty much all of us that left. It wasn't just me. So there's more than half the church kind of left at once. But so this is pretty widely accepted that he was developing feelings for her, spending a lot of time doing projects together and one-on-one counseling. And I also think, I can't positively confirm this, but think that she was pretty mentally unstable. Theory is that narcissistic personality disorder and borderline personality disorder have this, when there's science on this, is weird. Theory is that's kind of what was going on there. But I think that he was attracted to her and wanted her. And it sure does look like there was, I call it a long-term, but an escalated long-term game plan for him to get what he wanted here. Not altogether different from a leader starting to preach polygamy, right? So that he can gratify himself. So I think that's kind of what was going on, or at least half of the story. Because the other half is he definitely had this long-term pattern of really needing this. I think he's a grandiose narcissist, but with some malignancy in there as well. This grandiosity of us having this huge spiritual awakening and revival. This just the spirit moving. And so he's also pushing for that. So I think two things were at play there. So when he starts pushing for that, it starts kind of the way it always did, and felt normal to us. But very quickly, I remember we always had these Friday night worship services that I also think there were cult tactics used in these. Like they would start at 7:30, and very often we would be kept there till midnight. Sleep deprivation seems like an extreme accusation, but there were things like that at play, I believe. And dim lighting, very influenceable setting, like the emotional tone set, really contrived here for the whole congregation to come together and worship, and then in silence and prayer, and then out loud prayer and prophecy to seek God's presence. Like we're always being pushed to seek for more. Okay. And so I remember the Friday night service when all of this really kicked off, and this was pre-COVID, by 6 months to a year. I'm not exactly sure. It would have been 2019 in the summer. So whenever COVID hit was, maybe 6 to 9 months later. And he got up on this tirade, like he's hearing from the Lord, and he's kind of pacing around the room. And he had worked up this intense worship service, and then after that, he's hearing from the Lord and pacing around the room about some really bizarre things. I could give you some highlights, but he was very long-winded. It probably lasted for an hour, which is a short bout for him. So I can't remember the whole of it, but the highlights were God was sending the devil to come try to kill him because he's such a special prophet. But God revealed to him that he is his reckoning, capital R, for the devil. It's going to look like the devil wins and kills him or comes close to it, but it's Muhammad Ali's rope-a-dope, and he's going to come back and knock the devil out. Like that was kind of the terminology about a lion coming into a lair to try to destroy us all was used, but then he's going to beat the lion. And he went on about Muhammad Ali and rope-a-dope for a while. Sounds hilarious now. But at the time, in that worship service, I was enthralled and excited with the grandiosity of the momentous events that were about to take place
So
in
he
the
actually did
spiritual
say
realm.
rope-a-dope?
Absolutely, more than once.
That's great.
It's kind of a joke now to the survivors of us that were there, like the rope a dope.
My
No,
dad
he
just
used the term.
wasn't, my dad wasn't that cool. Like he wasn't that hip, you know? So
See,
I feel like I
he
missed out
described
a little
himself.
bit.
You did. Like if you wanted some excitement and some coolness, we had it. Like we had some really cool vocals and electric guitar, rock elements to these worship services. I mean, he grew up. I want to say, let's see, he would have been born in around the late 50s, early 60s, something like that. And so maybe earlier in the 50s. Like so the 60s and 70s kind of had a big impact on him. And then so when he was a teenager, he was a rock organist for, according to him, a very, very important band that had a very important record label agreement that he gave up for pursuit of the Lord because he couldn't violate the Sabbath day. I don't know how much of this is true at this point, but
That's
that
so
was the story.
interesting because the reason I'm saying that and I find it interesting is because my dad had a similar story. And I think there could be a theme where my dad he was a trained singer and he was excellent. I mean, he was phenomenal and he had been offered a contract with an opera company and he ended up turning it down to follow what he believed the Lord was calling him to do instead. Now, the legitimacy of that opera, I don't know. I mean, of course, I wasn't
I don't either. Like
born,
it
but
may be legitimate. He was a talented
yeah,
musician.
my dad
Um,
was talented too. Yeah.
And so he definitely liked the cool factor. Like he described himself as like the long rock hair and the glittery stars all over his shirt, bell bottom pants. Like he was really rocking the rock star vibe at the time. And so he definitely pulled elements of that type of thing into his church. And I'm telling you, I was, still young enough at the time and naive enough to think that this was cool, that we were on the cutting edge of the greatest spiritual event that the world has seen since Jesus was here and the apostles with Pentecost. And the devil had his full attention on us, our leader. Like, this is so special, but pardon my language, he's going to kick his ass. And that was verbiage specifically used in the sermons regularly. So there was definitely a level of coolness. Like there was this edginess to his sermons sometimes, which could scare the mess out of you because it could be turned on you. But if you were on the right side of things, it was cool. Like the edginess was cool. And the devil's coming for him, and he is God's reckoning, Muhammad Ali. And simultaneously with that, there is this huge spiritual love movement. The first love being poured out, fiery arrows from heaven coming down and striking him and then spreading to all of us. And then here's what's interesting is years past, he would not have accepted this influence, but he had allowed, I guess it's NAR stuff because it was earlier than how prevalent things have gotten that you've been dealing with recently, I think. But the Passion Translation and a lot of Bethel's music, he was allowing this influence to filter in. And my wife and I were actually very concerned when that became a little prevalent because we were looking at it and we're like, this isn't right. Like, this isn't holding to decades of longstanding doctrine for us, some of the stuff that's infiltrating here. And we really couldn't believe he was allowing it. But I don't know what changed with him, if it was strictly about his attraction to this other woman, or he saw. I don't know how much of it is subconscious or benign or straight up calculated. Maybe he saw a new lever that could be used with the Passion Translation because Song of Solomon got used a lot when this movement started from the Passion Translation. And it's been a minute since I've read it, long time. Don't intend to again, to be honest. But so I don't know if you could describe it as very graphic, but in retrospect, I'm feeling like it was pretty descriptive and pretty graphic. And he used it and took it to another level. So this happened over the course of 6 months to a year. And the boiling water it got cranked up way. If there were a temperature double boiling, like that's what we were shooting for here. And it just turned up too fast, and it put up too many red flags. And we were along for the ride for 6+ months or so. But by the end of it, we were recognizing things are getting pushed way too far. It still blows my mind, though, how much we were willing to swallow before we got to the point of having to leave. Because just to be frank and explicit, I definitely think the direction we were headed, you give me you've heard the whole story, your time frame guess on this. I wouldn't have been surprised now if it was 6 months to 12 months, if that we were pushing like actual sexual orgy type cult environment with the way things were escalating. Now, we did not get there, but if he hadn't pushed it so hard and so fast, I think we would have. I really do. We were dialed in enough to be the type of group that could stand around and take the sideline together. Like that mentality and control was mostly there. So the language and Song of Solomon and the influence there with maybe his own personal desires, and then that moved in with this really intense, like our worship services had always been lively and focused on some charismatic elements and pursuing God's presence, but you could actually, if anyone's interested, you could contact me. I could direct you to some Facebook video footage and live services and stuff where you could see anyone from an outside looking in would go like, you ever watch a movie where there's like a indigenous tribal people that they're the type that are making blood sacrifices and like whipping themselves into a frenzy? From a perspective, you could kind of see our worship services from that type of lens. It definitely looked like a whole nother level than we'd ever done before. And long story short, it was intense, and it got so intense so fast that it definitely pushed us to the point of needing to exit. And there's a little bit more into that, but I'll pause in case you wanted to jump on anything in particular.
The escalation, because we talk about escalation all the time when we talk about cult groups and different movements, because there is escalation over time. We pretty much count on that. But I think that's where, not that I'm trying to give, hey, fun tip if you're trying to be a cult leader, but the escalation did get too fast. I mean, it was too much too quick. People weren't going to be able to keep up with that. And I think that would speak to a couple things for someone. Now, there could be something psychological going on. I don't want to rule that out. There could also be such an intense desire to get what someone wants that, in conjunction with just thinking, wow, I've gotten away with what I've gotten away with for so long that, everyone's going to continue to track with me. People get overconfident in conjunction with having a strong desire.
I think so.
Yeah. And so mixing the two together, and all of a sudden it's like, wait, you've lost me. Like, you've gone too quick. And I'm glad that happened, because otherwise, like you said, you guys could still be there. And so I'm glad you're out, and I'm glad it fell apart ultimately. But when you talk about the arrows, the fiery arrows, I think that could be taken a couple different ways. Are you saying it in like a Cupid's arrow kind of thing? Like they were fiery arrows, like of love that you all were to have for one another? Can you share a little bit more about what the love move kind of practically looked like?
Wow. So it sounds a little bit cheap if you reference Cupid, but essentially, yes, like he likened it to, I can't remember if he brought in some scripture that tied into this a little bit, but the language there, and that was a common theme that was really built off of, he likened it to the fire, like God describes himself as fire sometimes, right? The fire of God, that is the passionate, pure love of God, was on fire on an arrow, and he saw it as a vision come down out of heaven and strike him, and then one other person, and the flame spread. And so then this flame, this fiery love straight from God, was to completely change us and transform us like we had never really known God's love before, like we're going to know it now. He called it this spread, this movement of this love was this once in a lifetime event that's happening and starting with us, and it's going to change the world. It's a movement of God that cannot be stopped. Like, he used that a lot. Like, and he said, if you're not on board yet, if you haven't felt it yet, don't worry, you will. Which is interesting because that messaging changed as time transformed to, if you're not feeling it, if you're not participating correctly, well, then you're clearly carnal and not a part of God's fold anymore. Like, so there was a real fear tactic, shunning, control technique used there later on. But originally it was like, it cannot be stopped. And then 6 months, 9 months later, he was accusing those of us in the congregation that weren't behaving exactly as he wanted, as we quenched it. We stopped it. Which 6 months prior, it was unquenchable and unstoppable. But then later, we tainted it. But there was this message this whole time that referenced how pure it was, what an intense love it was, and how it was going to transform the way we interacted with one another in the world. The whole thing. The marriage bed with the Song of Solomon thing ends up getting referenced a lot. This relationship between the bride and the groom was really, really intensified and spread. I mean, it didn't get 1000% inappropriate descriptive from the lectern, but it got inappropriate in discussing the marriage bed and these analogies of the marriage carriage, and it's all us with one another. Like, the love and feelings that he was experiencing for each of us was the same that the groom experiences for his bride. So he took this analogy in the Song of Solomon and Jesus in the church and really ratcheted it up. And that the love that we experience for one another and for him is the bride's love being reciprocated back to the groom, and it's passionate. And he used these phrases like, to the pure, all things are pure. To anyone else looking at this, it's going to seem inappropriate. But it's not inappropriate because you are pure. And so all of this is pure. And there was a lot, as things intensified in regular services, but especially in these dim, dark Friday night worship services and ones that would go into Saturday night, this level of intimacy that was encouraged. We'd always been kind of a huggy church, like we just loved one another. We were family. But he was encouraging cuddling. There were some kissing on the lips of people that were not married, people that were married with people that weren't their spouses. A lot of slow dancing. There were a couple songs at the time. I can't remember the names of them now, but they were written about the Song of Solomon. Like, very romantic, slow songs that he would play on repeat, that there would be a lot of intimate dancing, like very close together. He was telling people, this is, I mean, it's graphic, but it's poignant. He was telling people privately, but more than a few people, that God had made him impotent so that he wouldn't have any difficulties in all of the slow dancing and hugging with all of the women in the church, which was really something, because to me and all of the other young men, like my friends at the time, like when we found out about this, we were like, that's interesting, because we weren't really having problems here. Like, it wasn't like we were hearing this from a platonic's the wrong word, but we didn't have the same vision on this that he must have, I guess is what you would say. Like, no one needed to be struck with divine impotence. But apparently that was on his mind. So that's the type of fiery love that we're talking about as morphing here. And it was so shocking, though, because we were sitting back saying, wait a minute, for decades, you from the lectern have preached the Billy Graham approach, which is, if another woman gets on an elevator with me when I'm out traveling or whatever, and she's not my wife, I get off so that we avoid the appearance of evil at all costs. Like, sexual scandal has taken down leader after leader after leader in the church. It's never going to happen in our situations because we go above board to avoid the appearance of evil even, and to not put yourself in temptation's way. And now all of a sudden, anything is permissible almost. And I'm talking, like, we hadn't reached the point I think it was headed yet, but I'm talking like two single people in the church of opposite sex being encouraged to be in a recliner together in a dark room alone, cuddling for hours at night. Like, to me, that's unacceptable.
Well, and
But
so he tipped from, okay, we're going to avoid the appearance of a scandal by getting off the elevator to, well, we're going to avoid the appearance of a scandal by making it not a scandal. We're going to
right,
remove it as being a scandal by saying impotency,
saying
by
it's
saying
not.
all this stuff. Yeah. And even like the physical thing about himself of it couldn't possibly be because I don't function in that way anymore. And then to pass that to everyone, getting everyone involved. So it's like, well, we're all doing it. Like this is the whole congregation. It's not just him. Everyone's a part of it.
I think that's a similar tactic to like polygamous cult leaders that are aiming to get what they want. All the men should be polygamous. Everyone here should have multiple wives, but ultimately, like you're pulling the strings to get what you want. You're just making it acceptable across the board.
Yeah.
Usually,
Well, as a leader, I would say you at least get dibs, right? So, because you're kind of pulling rank anyhow. Yeah. So, what was that final piece where you and your family were like, okay, yeah, we're out?
I mean, there were a few pieces. Like I can't boil it down to one, but essentially, for me, I had a few moments where I started to hear a few times where the doctrine I had been raised on, the belief I had in scripture's validity, I saw him straight up contradicting it and changing it blatantly. And that happened enough times to where I could not swallow it anymore. But see, that happened simultaneously with a couple of other things. Like it all was happening at the same time. Like, so my wife and I were discussing this a lot. We were newly parents. I think our daughter should have been 2 to 3 in this time frame. And that changed a lot for us, how we saw the world. You know, like you go through life living a certain way and the way you've been raised, the way you've been treated, and the way you see yourself. And that's one thing. But when you see that start getting pushed onto your child, there's like this instinctive protective mechanism that's like, no, 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 no. You're not doing to me what you did. You're not doing to her what you did to me. Like, that's unacceptable. Like, so there were these moments, like, he was highly volatile. And so it would go from lovey dovey, like encouraging the grandkids to small children to jump around and run and play in service. And like, this is a great worship moment. And like, I love you, to you better sit down and shut up. What are you doing making noise over there? And like, there was this real harsh level of authority. And that started to bleed over onto our daughter and stuff that we've dealt with forever. But you see some abuse start to trickle down to your child, that changes the story. And then so these three factors. That's number two. I'm not ranking them, but number two. And then number three, the level of inappropriateness that he was personally engaging with this, and I don't know how far it went, I can't say, but from what are aware of and could see, still the level, bare minimum, it was an emotional affair with a younger single mom in the church, betraying his wife of 50 years or whatever that is beloved in the church. Like she is probably a lot like how you describe your mom, you know, like just this level of purity and kindness and servitude and grace, like also the person taking the most abuse and doing it with ultimate grace. So absolutely beloved of the church. So the way he started treating her more and more vocally and publicly, harsher and harsher, compared to the lovey-doveyness that was going on with, he actually called them in this spiritual move. He actually called his wife like the older, mature bride as an example for the church, but then his newer infatuation that probably was to become his bride one day as the new immature bride that needed a special level of attention. Like he actually called them both brides and then was interacting a certain way. Like essentially he was dating the newer one and abusing and abandoning harsher and harsher, and worse, his beloved wife of 50 years that everyone, you know, adored and cherished. And so that discrepancy, the way that looked externally, got so bad that it couldn't be accepted by a lot of us. And that's how I would sum it up. And oh, and the real, the last block, the domino that tipped them all was these things were happening simultaneously, but I still don't think we had what it took to call it for what it was. Like, we didn't know it was a cult still, and leave. Was stumbling upon, through another member in the church, a YouTube video about, I think it was 10 signs you were raised by a narcissist. And then that just led down a rabbit hole of YouTube videos from Dr. Carter and Dr. Romani on narcissism. And once we consumed enough information from experts about narcissism, we really couldn't see it any other way. And so we didn't actually know we were leaving a cult at this time. We knew we had to separate from a narcissistic, abusive leader. And that was just this tipping point to the rest of my life, to this point of unraveling the past and going through processing trauma after trauma and grief after grief and confusion upon confusion, to end up here today where maybe I'm halfway there. I don't know. There's some progress that's taken place, but there's still plenty to go.
And you actually left the area altogether. And I wanted to pick up there and kind of wrap us up there, because it comes up a lot in conversations with people through beEmboldened. It's really difficult for those who have to stay in the same area, because a lot of times people do. They own homes, they've got jobs, whatever it is, they can't actually physically get up and relocate. I did actually relocate. I was able to. It's not like it all went smoothly. I was living in my car for a hot minute, but I got out of there. And you or someone else I know who was able to figure it out and have that work. And there are things that I think are so helpful about that. You can go to the grocery store, not where you're going to run into somebody. You just don't have this haunt everywhere that you go, or this very real sense of threat everywhere that you go. And yet it's also really difficult to start over, period, let alone having all of that be what's behind you and you're starting to disentangle and work through. And so I'm wondering if you could speak to that specific element a little bit, because I don't know if we've had someone share about this.
Yeah, that's a huge part of the story. I could speak at length to that if you had time, because you really put it in a good nutshell. Is there's a lot of benefit to leaving and starting over and being in a new place. And I'm glad that I did. It, for me, like, it had to happen. Like, it was, I just knew it, and it was a necessity, and I'm glad that I did it. But that being said, it is one of the hardest things I've ever done. It made it, and it's just both. You know, I think I've heard you say it on your recordings before, that you never wish someone to be in a cult. You never wish that on someone, but worse than that, you wouldn't really wish them to be leaving one either, because it's that difficult. So we left, and how much time went by? Something like a year to a year and a half. Somewhere between, I can't remember exactly, but so we left, and then we're there, and it was a small town. I think the population size was 28,000 people, and always scared of running into a narcissist in the grocery store, right? Or, because what's interesting is you leave, and for a time we still had like a close connection with a handful of the people that left right after us. And that was helpful. Like, there's still a level of community there and camaraderie, and we leaned on one another. But then somewhere along the way, everyone ends up in their own level of sorting out the mess that is left for you spiritually and mentally and emotionally. And you kind of drift apart to where there's just a level of separation and isolation that exists going forward. I'm not really sure what plays into that, but we've kind of already lost everything. And then we're just left with constant fear and triggers living in that same environment in that small town, driving by the church building, like I was running a lawn company and a 24/7 gym. And like, so my lawn route had me, passing the church or a certain house. And I mean, his house was on a very public primary parkway in town. And so it was just very difficult emotionally still being there and triggering. And I'd only processed a very small part of what it was to have left his group and what I had lost, like very small part. At the time, I was very, very focused on the well-being of, this is going to make it sound a little too altruistic, but I really think I was primarily focused on the health and well-being of my wife and my daughter. Like she was very young, so that was kind of long-term for my daughter, but for my wife, like she had a lot more ties to the situation than me in a lot of respects that went longer and deeper and had a greater impact on. And so we spent a lot of time talking about that, at least a year, praying about it, deciding what we might do and wanting to leave. And we lived our whole life believing we had to be in this one location. This is God's one. He placed you here. This is it. And leaving is a sin, ultimate. Leaving God's covering. And so we had to kind of break those bonds a little bit. And then we owned a house, 2 businesses there. And so deciding to leave, like I had a lot of logistical difficulties, but we really were chasing a level of freedom and peace that we'd never really been able to know before, except in brief moments of vacationing in the Florida Panhandle. And there's something about this environment that we realized our world had been blown up and we needed to start over. And we decided, why wait until we were tired of trying to move to the beach? So, and my belief system now, my view on Christianity, like it's still tumultuous and with plenty of confusion, but I still believe in like my creator and God. And it's challenging having him seeing the level of pain and suffering that exists in the world and grappling with what he can allow. But simultaneously, I believe that he loves us and he's looking out for me. And the point is I believe his hand really worked in bringing a lot of logistical pieces together to allow us to be able to leave and start over. And I was blessed in a way there that a lot of people aren't. And I've been blessed and prospered in starting over physically, but emotionally, I'm still sorting through the pain and difficulty that exists there, which I still wouldn't discourage anyone from doing it for, your audience. But the first year of having moved and being here, there's a lot of good with, the physical separation and the new environment, but it allowed, when it was in that year that I sought out your help, discovered you, it allowed the space and the reality and the enormity of all of the losses that come along with leaving. It put a real tangible, palpable point to all of that. And it really culminated in an incredible amount of emotional distress for me that was, well, it's still unpleasant, but I am making progress. It was very, very hard to bear for a good 12 to 24 months.
And now you are, how many years is it since the move? Is it 3?
So we moved in spring of 2022. So we just hit the end of 3 years, I think.
3. Okay.
March.
So now, yeah. So 3 years. What would you say are some of your wins at this stage?
Wins. Like I said, it depends on when you catch me, how positive and optimistic I'm feeling about the wins. Because apparently I've done some research this past week about some of the depression I experience. And some of this I think is tied to me historically for most of my life, a lot of my life, but definitely intensified with everything that I've been through past several years. And apparently there's a seasonality aspect to it, which I usually always thought was middle of winter for people. But apparently there's evidence to support like a late spring, early summer moment. So I've actually been struggling quite a bit lately. So that can cloud my perspective on how many wins I see. But I know that they're still there when I can get enough breath of fresh air and sunshine to step back and see it more accurately. I know that they're there. I definitely feel free now, and that took a minute to get there because disentangling, like you said, the thought processes, the doctrines, the control, like your entire life. Like for me, it was my entire life, just to some extent, over 30 years. The worldview, who you are, your foundation, everything, your spiritual eternity, all of it, the ways you interact with the world, what you should care about, what you believe, all of that is completely laid bare in this type of situation. So disentangling that, well, I'm not done by any means, but there's a period of time where it's so intense that you can't see straight. It's like you're underwater, tumbling, like there is no foundation, and it's very disorienting, and you don't feel free at all. You still feel very much in bondage to a lot of the things from your past. So I do finally feel a great degree of freedom, physically, spiritually, emotionally, just period, like autonomy in life, right? And a sense of agency. So gaining that is probably one of the number one wins. Like it doesn't get much bigger than that, I guess. The like you were referencing, moving, starting over, like that definitely helped there. Into a place that like I truly love. Like it's one of my only spiritual wins at the moment. I don't believe this to be permanent, but at the moment is a spiritual, peaceful connection. That's not because, unfortunately, a lot of your listeners will probably identify it's not always peaceful or good anymore having a relationship or trying to with God after exiting this type of environment. It's one of the worst parts, to be honest, is it really puts a struggle on that. But being in a place like the beach with the ocean or the mountains would work for me as well. But beauty, nature, like the transcendence of these types of things. I know you've referenced this before, right? Like where you kind of just have to be able to sit and there's a lot of pain and confusion and just trust that God is holding you in a different sort of experience level, prayer, Bible study, all of that stuff can be completely gone for you, unfortunately, just completely triggering. So being in this environment and being able to obtain that at times is a win because you can easily go so far the other way to where atheism is the answer for you, like, so for me, that's a win. It's not exactly the way I would like things to only be or continue. It's a win for me seeing a level of happiness and freedom to experience life and grow in my daughter that probably 3-ish when we left and is 7.5 now, to watch her like just express what joy and beauty and freedom really looks like is huge. And I think I've processed through enough of what's happened and gained enough understanding, at least, to frame it all correctly the majority of the time, to where it's not causing me quite so much angst and confusion and looking at it. Like, I mean, there's still pain there, but it's less tumultuous from a understanding perspective and emotional perspective. At least I can see it for what it is and not be completely undone by it. I think that's a win. I think it's a win to just this. Unfortunately, this might extend to organized religion as a whole, but it's a win for me to not be in a controlled, abusive environment and to be making the choices for my life without fear of another person. Like, that's huge. It's a win. It's a huge win to be able to, and I guess I'll end with this one in case you had something else. I don't want to be too long-winded. It's a huge win to be able to think for myself and have the autonomy, though the world of information is overwhelming, but the autonomy to pursue all of the information, look at all of the facts, decide what I believe without it just being told to me. Like, that's a really big deal. It's a difficult thing to arrive at and sort through, to get very grounded. Like, I'm just not all the way there, but still a win.
And I wanted to ask that question because I know that there are wins, because you've shared about them along the way. If you're someone who's watching or listening to this and you're like, gosh, I can't come up with any wins right now, you may not be in the place yet to really have them. And so I know that doesn't feel okay, but it is okay. And so I want to be clear that I'm not asking Blake that question because there's got to be wins. There are some things that we've lived through that there are not wins. They're just losses.
There's still tremendous losses.
Absolutely.
And on the really bad days, it's hard to see the wins because all you see are the tremendous loss.
Absolutely. And so for those of you, though, who are connecting, maybe some of what Blake's sharing is resonating with you, I think a part of what I was hoping to highlight in this conversation with you, Blake, is that this is where you're at today. And all of us, we're somewhere today. This is very much a journey. Like, I mean, we don't use that language just because it sounds cool. In fact, I think it's overused and I would love a different word. So if you have one, write it in a comment and suggest it for me, because I'd love to retire the word journey. But it's a continuation, and it's connected and we're continuing forward. And there will always be tremendous losses. We will always look back and see these periods of just straight up robbery and devastation. And as we do move forward, we will also see more wins along the way. And we may experience other losses along the way. I know you have. Sometimes it's just new information. It just shakes everything up again. And so I really appreciate your willingness to share, Blake, and to be vulnerable. Our stories are not wrapped up with bows, and your stories out there probably are not wrapped up with bows. And that's okay. And we're here for that. And you are so not the only one. And so, Blake, thank you so much for having this conversation with me, and
absolutely.
And for all of you who are out there watching and listening to this episode, if you want to hear more stories like this, as well as breakout conversations about some of the topics Blake even touched on today, feel free to subscribe, share this episode, follow along. We have our in-person conference coming up in Tennessee in September. Reach out to us if you want to get connected. If you're looking for resources, whether for yourself or for someone that you love, that you're wanting to support, or if you're interested in prevention, you want your team to prevent, whatever that may look like, beEmboldened.com. I'll see you soon.